Hi everyone, welcome to another video. I'm Milan Kundera. Today I'm going to talk about the books that I've read until now for my Around the World in 80 Books project, and I'll talk about the books that I've read that are set in either Europe or Oceania. There are 11 books and I like to talk about them a little more, so you might want to grab a cup of tea for this. Now for the Netherlands I read a book by Herman Koch called Het Diner. Living in the Netherlands, I've obviously read a lot of books about its history, and I have a good idea of what this country feels like, I believe. But I ended up choosing this book because it's one of those books that I often see in bookshops when I'm in another country. So I figured I'd count it, even though it doesn't really say anything about the feel of the Netherlands or the history of the Netherlands, and it could actually be set in any other country. Het Diner is translated in English to The Dinner, and it's a mystery thriller. It's about two couples who go out to dinner in a fancy restaurant, and the couples are two brothers and their wives. And one of the brothers is the narrator of the story. And they talk about recent movies, they talk about the war in Iraq, but you feel that there's an underlying tension, that there's a reason that they're there and that they're not really talking about it. The narrator is a very frustrated man. He doesn't like his brother, who's very arrogant, and his brother is also in the running to becoming the next prime minister of the Netherlands, and he's quite boisterous about that, and his brother doesn't really like that. There's also some tension with his wife. You feel that there's something they want to discuss, but they haven't really taken the time for it. And as the book develops, you learn that the thing they need to talk about is their kids, because it turns out that they did something pretty bad. Like I said, this book is not really a book you should read if you want to learn about the Netherlands. So I wouldn't recommend it for that, but it's a very nice mystery thriller and it has a very nice pacing, and I really liked where it was going. Then we have Belgium. We were, at the time that I started this project, reading a book that was written by a Belgian author with my book club, so I ended up choosing that one. And the book is called The Angel Maker by Stefan Brijs, and it's a weird little mystery horror book. It's about a geneticist, I think that's what it's called. Someone that does research with genes, not genes that you wear, but like our genes in our body. And the geneticist is called Victor Hoppe, and he goes back to the village that he was raised in after 20 years of not having set foot there. And he comes back with his sons, 3 triplets, who are still babies, and he is looking for someone to look after his baby boys because he needs to work and he doesn't have time for that. So he finds a neighbor called Charlotte who can look after them, and he has very strict rules about what Charlotte is and is not allowed to do. And one of the things that is very weird, but Charlotte finds out that there's a lot more weird things going on, is that she already has to teach these very young children about history and how to do math and stuff like that. And she discovers how strange the father and his boys really are. The book talks mostly about the ethics around genetics, and it was very interesting for that. It was an interesting book, not very astonishing or anything. It's like a sort of modern Frankenstein. I would recommend it if you like creepy stories about science and about a professor that is on a quest to prolong life. It's not necessarily a book that taught me anything about Belgium, so I might at one point look for another book that I can substitute. Next we have the book that I read for France, which is Germinal by Emile Zola. This is one of my all-time favorites, and that has partly to do with the fact that Emile Zola wrote a series of books called Les Rougon-Macquart, and it's about a family or 2 families, and one of the strands is the Macquart, and that is also my family name. So I'm kind of slightly biased. But this is an amazing book, and I picked this book for France, also here another country that I already know a lot about, because this book talks about something that we French are known for, which is going on strike. In this book we meet Etienne Lantier, who is looking for work in the north of France in the mining industry. And he is lucky to find a roof and work with the Maheu family. And through his eyes and through his experience we see what it's like to live and work in the mining industry in the north of France. Emile Zola is a writer that is very descriptive, and all his books are actually just excuses to show us how a certain group of people or a certain class live. And so in this one, he talks about the mining industry. So in this one, we see the life of the miners with the possible jobs that there were underground but also above ground, the huge families, the roles of the wives, of the men, and how the children were left to their own devices. And the plot in this book is that at one point the wages are cut. Well, it's more complicated than that, but basically the wages are cut, and therefore the workers decide to go on strike. And throughout all of the characters in the book, we see the different reasons for going on strike, how they cope with not having any money. There's a group including Etienne Lantier, who's been reading books by Karl Marx and really want to have more socialist structures that protect the workers. This is a fascinating book. It gives you so much information, it gives you so much feel, and the characters are so well fleshed out. It's fabulous and I highly recommend it, especially if you like these type of dense descriptive books or you want to read about life in working class in France in, the 19th century. Next, I have the book that I counted for Britain, and I counted The Dark Circle by Linda Grant. It's about a brother and a sister who, shortly after the Second World War, are diagnosed with tuberculosis, and they are sent to the countryside, to Kent, to heal and recuperate. Now, we tend to forget how not that long ago different diseases ruled our lives, and tuberculosis was one of these diseases that was very impactful, and for the people that were diagnosed with it, it sometimes meant that they were separated completely from their family and friends. And that is what was shown in this book. For example, the girl, the sister, when she comes to the facility, she is separated from her brother. Never mind being separated from her family by going to the facility and not having any contact with them. And she is set on a balcony in a bed. And for months on end, she just has to lay in the bed and breathe in the fresh air. And she's not allowed to do anything. Me, now, when I look at that, I think, no, don't go outside when there's something wrong with your lungs. But at that time, this was one of the possible cures. And her brother has other cures that he's supposed to try out. And to be honest, I can't remember much of the plot. I don't think there was much of a plot, but it was mostly interesting to read about life in a sanatorium and how the patients were actually kind of test rats for all of these weird treatments. Now, when it comes to Ireland, I read Milkman by Anna Burns. This takes place in Northern Ireland and describes the time or surrounding the struggles. We follow a young girl and we read about her relationship with her boyfriend, but also with her family and with a strange man called the Milkman. And the Milkman is an important figure in war that was going on, and part of the book is about how the community reacts to her apparently having some kind of relationship. This book was all over BookTube when it came out. A lot of people completely in love with it and really liked the writing style, and I'll admit I was not one of them. This was not my cup of tea. The writing style is completely different to regular books, I'll say. None of the characters are given any names. It isn't even said that this is actually during the struggles, you just know that from the setting. But the fact that when this girl describes her eldest sisters, so she doesn't say Francine or whatever, she says eldest sister. Or for other sisters, it's sister number 2, or it's husband of sister number 2. And because of that, and that's part that I liked, you don't think of this character when she says eldest sister. You make the link to your own eldest sister, not that I have one. And the effect of that is that it's easier to realize that what was happening in the book could happen anywhere. So I once again, I liked that. But at the same time, because it was everywhere and it wasn't fixed, I didn't feel fixed. I would have preferred to have more stuff that felt tangible. So it's an interesting book. I don't think it's for everybody, but I would recommend, if you want to try it, to first try a couple of pages to see if the style is something that you appreciate. Now, for Germany, we have Tijl, which was written by Daniel Kehlmann. Now, the book is set in the Middle Ages. I personally don't read a lot of books set in the Middle Ages, so it was nice to do something different. And the book is about Tijl, who is an entertainer and a provocateur who goes from, village to village to do jokes and juggle and transmit news. And because he's a provocateur, he also gets entwined a bit into the politics at the time. And we read also about him growing up. And his father had some issues with the church, which was not something he wanted at the time. So his father gets taken away, and then Tijl needs to grow up on his own, basically. Now, when it comes to what I learned about Germany, I would say that would be some more information about the political landscape and the overall atmosphere in those villages at the time. And I would recommend you giving the book a try if you like books that are set in the Middle Ages. Then we have Spain. And for Spain, I read the book called Ages of Lulu in English, and Ages of Lulu was written by Almudena Grandes. I have opinions about this book. I asked a friend of mine who is Spanish if he could recommend me something from Spain, and he said, after thinking about it and talking to some of his friends, he came up with this book. So I got it from the library and just started blindly. And apparently this book is just a huge sex fest in Madrid, and it turns out I'm kind of prudish and this was not for me. The book is about Lulu, who is a 15-year-old girl, and she is seduced by Pedro, and the book talks about her sexual experiences while she's growing up. Pedro becomes kind of a brother-father figure for her, and in the beginning we read a lot about their sexual encounters and the stuff that he makes her do. Because it's not just regular, I don't know what's regular, but he invites other people to their bed or wherever it is that they're having fun. And shortly afterwards they marry, but when they do, Pablo quickly turns to even younger girls, and she's left to her own devices, and she looks more for other sexual adventures and mainly with homosexual men. So there's a lot of descriptions about her doing stuff with 4 men at the same time, which again was not something I needed to know or read about. And there's also a very strange scene where Pedro starts with some weird bondage thing with her, and then he invites someone else, and she quickly realizes that someone else is her brother, and she's basically raped by her brother. So this book is really not for everyone. I will say it's not all bad, because it is a commentary on the overbearing role of men, and it presents this idea that when a woman finds sexual pleasure, then she's basically doomed, because that is the only thing that she will want in her life. So it goes deeper than that. But for me, honestly, the sex was just too much. And again, apparently I'm a prude, which is fine. I was left disturbed by this book for a long time. I think I complained about it to that friend. Well, I'm still complaining about it. So, but if you're okay with lots of very descriptive sex and things that you don't really want to know, then this is an interesting book because of, again, the commentary that goes with it. Now, completely different for Iceland, we're going from hot to cold. That is a book for Iceland. I read The Glass Woman by Caroline Leah. The book is set in the year 1680, and it has some magical realism, so once again, completely different. We meet Rosa, and she decides to marry a man from another village because he's very rich, and then he can help her mother get enough food. This man is called Jon Eriksson, because apparently everybody is called Eriksson in Iceland. I just watched the Eurovision movie on Netflix. It's so much fun. But Jon Eriksson is a very strict man, and he doesn't want his wife, Rosa, to meet the other villagers, basically. And he doesn't want her to go into specific parts of the house. And he won't talk about himself whatsoever or ask her how she's doing. The villagers think that Jon killed his previous wife because she just disappeared at one point. So Rosa is basically left to her own devices, and especially at night, especially when Jon is not there, she's hearing all of these sounds come from the upstairs of the house where she's not allowed to go. So there's a very mysterious atmosphere. The book painted a picture of life in such bare circumstances, where from one moment to the next a snowstorm could break out, and then you could find yourself completely locked in for weeks on end and not even being capable to go see your neighbors. So that was very interesting. I didn't really like the resolution of the mystery, but I enjoyed the dark feel of the book. So if you plan on reading this, if you think this is for you, I would definitely read this in winter if there's a storm outside. Next, we have the Czech Republic, and I read the well-known book by Milan Kundera called The Unbearable Lightness of Being. And this is about two couples, Thomas and Teresa on one hand mainly, and Sabina and Franz on the other. And Thomas is a womanizer, and he is married to Teresa, and Teresa is the woman of his life, but he still has many women on the side, and Teresa is aware of that, and it makes her very unhappy. One of these women is Sabine, who is also Thomas's best friend. Sabine is an artist, and she lives a very frivolous life, and she at one point has a relationship with Franz, who is very much in love with her and would like her to commit to him. And the book is set in Prague during the communist era, and Thomas is an intellectual, a surgeon, and at one point he writes a pamphlet about, can't remember really what, but the communists did not like it. So because of that, he and Teresa have to move away from Prague, and they have to go live in a small village. The book is rather complex. It does a lot without using a lot of words, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of philosophical themes going on. I mean, the unbearable lightness of being should give you a hint about that. But to be honest, those went completely over my head. All the symbolism and all the second meanings and stuff, did not see any of that. So this book would definitely benefit from a reread for me. But I still really liked it. I still really appreciated how it showed the atmosphere of distrust in the big city, and how you didn't know what others believed and felt, and how that made people feel very lonely. So that was interesting. And if you like novels that have a philosophical feel, I would definitely give this a go, because it's a really good book. Now, the last book for Europe, at least, is The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevski. I already talked about this a little bit. It's mainly about the Karamazov family, one father and three official sons, at least. And one of the sons, the eldest brother, is in love with the same woman as his father. Well, I'm not completely sure it's love. It might also just be lust. And there's also a clash about financial problems. Now, on the cover, on the back, it says that the book is mainly about the repercussions of Fyodor Karamazov, the father's death, and the repercussions especially for his three children, especially the son that is accused of the murder. But the murder only happens in the second part of the book. So it's really not the only thing that the book does. In the first half of the book, it's mainly presenting us all of these different characters. There are many side characters, so the book really paints a picture of the whole of Russian society. At least that's the feeling I got. There are probably groups that were not mentioned at all. And in the first part, and also in this first part, there are a lot of monologues about religion and about the justice systems, which was not my cup of tea, but I know people that enjoyed it. And it's only in the second part of the book that the plot really starts happening, and because the characters are kind of ridiculous at some points, there are very weird things going on, and I thought that was very entertaining. I would recommend this if you like big books, because this is one of those big books that talks about theology, and which has long description, but also has a weird plot and weird characters going with it. I have 2 books left, and those 2 books are not books that were from Europe, but from Oceania. The first is The Lost Man by Jane Harper. I already talked about this book in a previous video, so I'll link that up here somewhere. It's a mystery thriller, and the thing that it taught me about Australia is the vastness of some parts of Australia, and how some people have to drive for a couple of hours before arriving at the farm that is the nearest to their farm, and how those people always have to transport lots of food and water and guns and stuff to survive if something happens. I really got a feeling for how dangerous life is in those parts, and how lonely you can be, and how that meant that the people are kind of rough because they're on their own for a lot of time, and they live in very dire circumstances. So that was very interesting, and I really like this book, not only for the things that I learned about Australia, but the plot also was well executed. Now, when it comes to New Zealand, I read The Whale Rider by Witi Ihimeara. This book is told from the standpoint of a young man who lives in a Maori tribe, and he describes how a young girl is born. Obviously she's young at the time, but the baby is called Kahu. She's a girl, and she's very drawn to her grandfather, who is the chief of the tribe, but her grandfather rejects her completely, and even when she grows up, she's always still wants to go to him, but he always denies her completely. So for example, she wants to go to the school that the grandfather opened, where he's teaching the young boys about the Maori culture, but she's not allowed because she's a girl. Now, at one point, the narrator also leaves the tribe because he is going off to work in a different part of New Zealand. I can't remember where. And he faces a lot of discrimination because he is Maori. So that was very interesting to read about. The book is about the conflict between traditions and modern times, and it was interesting to read how important tradition is, how that is your core value, but at the same time stuff around you just changes. So that was very interesting. It was very interesting to read also about a Maori myth, the myth of the whale rider. Kahu has a magical bond with whales. She's able to communicate with them, and that echoes the myth of the whale rider. So that was very cool as well. I would have liked the book to be longer because it was very interesting to read about the culture and the traditions and the myths. So I would have liked it to be longer and to be more. So I would recommend you reading this if you like books that talk about tribal cultures. Now, those were all of the books that I've read until now that are from Europe or Oceania. As you can see, wait, I'll show you the globe again. As you can see, I still have a lot of white spots, especially for Eastern Europe. And also a lot of the islands here. I still have no idea, and I don't really for most have an idea what I'm going to read yet. So if you have recommendations, please let me know. If you've read any of these books, I would also love to hear from you, especially if you've read The Ages of Lulu. I'd be curious what your experience was. I will see you in a next video. Thank you for watching. Bye!